I was looking into this for a long time, and it occurred to me when I was looking at the phrase "in God we trust," and I thought to myself, well, what is a trust? So I looked it up and what a legal trust is, and I looked it up on WikiLeaks, or not WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, and basically it's when a group of people are united together for the good of maybe somebody else or something like that. And so I started thinking, if it's printed on the back of the money that in God we trust, then what is God? And so I thought to myself, well, maybe at this time these people who are at the time that they put that phrase on the money was the right time to do it, to identify exactly what God is in the Bible. And the idea behind God is, from what I read about it, is it's kind of a mystery, but some people say it comes from an Akkadian word. The Akkadian word is kada, and that means himself. And Jesus says, he quotes Psalms when he says, "You are all gods." And that makes sense then, because we are all a self. But now we're united together under the idea that there's something else that is also a self, a higher power. And so what is that power? And if we look at history, we learn from the monarchy of like England or medieval Europe that they made laws. The king and queen ruled under the authority of what was known as then as the royal we, and that meant God and them. And also if you look at, say, Egypt, the Pharaoh spoke for God, and you can look at America as being a god like that, and the president speaks for God. So what is behind the mouthpiece of God? And you can look at the biblical translation of God, and that comes from the word Elohim, Hebrew word Elohim, and that is means basically the ones who keep their promises, and that is a plural word. And you can look at Genesis 1 when he creates man, and God creates man, and he says, "Let us make man in our image." And so that means that God is plural, so it's a group of people. Now you can see that if they make man in their image, you can think of this as when Washington defeated the crown of England, and that group of men, if you look on the back of a $2 bill when it says "Signing of the Declaration of Independence," and it's kind of in a vision that is Elohim, and they are creating the man. Most of you people have heard of a nation being called a man. They're paying the man, or whatever. So that group of people would be, they gave us promises which were like the Bill of Rights, Constitution. And so that group of people would have been Elohim. Well, what they did was they defeated the central bank. And a lot of people don't know that, but a good video to watch on that subject would be, it all started with a stamp on YouTube there, you can find it. And that's with Judge Andrew Napolitano, and that's the video that got him fired from Fox. And so you see what kind of power the central bank has. And capitalism is nothing new. There's always been the idea that somebody wants to control the printing of the money. And when they started the nation, government had Congress regulated the dollar and fixed its weights and measures, and you can see that on, and the Constitution is the original Constitution. And so banks would print their own money, and government would regulate them. But since then, since 1912, the Federal Reserve was made, and that monopolized the currency. And in 1971, then Richard Nixon took us off of the gold standard. And I think that what they did was they changed what the definition of gold was. And that means that everybody who works for the dollar is a piece of gold in the treasury. And that's my opinion, and you have to be working for the money. But anyway, England's central bank was actually, what they do is and they haven't even, Ron Paul attacks this question, or asks this question a lot too, and who owns our Federal Reserve Bank? And I personally think maybe the Queen of England, but maybe not, but it's a trust, and everybody who uses the money supports it, and buys into it, and feeds into it, and worships it. To worship means to serve. So you're serving that bank with your life. And the power behind that central bank is unknown, and it was that way in Britain. The King of England was acting on behalf of the bank, because the bank was wanting to put the colonists in debt. Somebody has to take on the debt. You notice that in recent history. Now, you can apply things that we've learned from recent history into the past history. When you look at Julius Caesar, he was killed. And if somebody had the printing, the monopoly on the currency, and Caesar wasn't going along with them, then they could pay somebody, a good friend that's very close to the inside, a lot of money and make that man very wealthy. And that's probably what happened with Brutus. He probably really was a friend, but he just got paid so much money. And if you look at that, about 50 years later, Nero was in power, and he began debasing the currency. And then a few hundred years later, Rome collapsed. So you can look at that recent history of JFK being killed and apply that to what happened in Rome. And so let's go back even further to Egypt. And we can look at, and now the Egyptians didn't call themselves Egyptians back then. They were Kemet is what they were called, and the Bible refers to Egypt as Mizraim. And I think that means darkness. But anyway, Egypt is the Greek word for black. So I figured Hebrew is probably darkness. And so why was King Tut, Tutankhamun killed? And it's probably the same reason, is because they were wanting to do something that he didn't want to go along with. He thought was bad for the people. I would assume so, and I believe that that's probably correct. It's usually the good guy who gets assassinated, the people who go against what these central bankers want to do. And so I have identified the idea to animate this idea that this group of people, the central bank, is God in the Bible, and we're being warned of this thing. And so if you think of it like that, Jesus says there's only one who is good, and he is in heaven, that's God. And you can look at that as them controlling the law. Everything that they do is good. And we learned that from Nazi Germany. It wasn't until they knocked Adolf Hitler out of there that they said, oh, it was bad. But that whole time it was good while he was in there. And there is a strange prayer of Solomon, and I think it's in 2 Kings. I'm not sure. I'll find it and I'll put it on here. But he says he has a prayer for when God is in heaven. So I think that heaven is an idea that it is at the top of government, and that's why we have on the back of the dollar the Tower of Babel, and would be the eye in the sky there would be God's eye, or whatever, or the mind of God, the central bankers, and they're standing on top of all of us, and that's the Babylonian captivity, is the Tower of Babel, and we are all those bricks there united in a trust to uphold the bankers, and the bankers are God, and it's always been that way. We have given the Bible, the writers of the Bible were very intelligent to do that, to animate him as though he is a living, breathing being, and really it's a corporation, a head corporation that doesn't involve the rest of the body. It is only the head, or the cap. Head, and now remember, this is referred to a lot in the Bible. They talk about the head or the capstone, and that's capitalism. The word capitalism's root word is capite, meaning head, and that's the top, that capstone, the mind, the brain. And if you notice on all of these dollars, they have a decapitated president on each dollar. It has only the head. So capitalism is head worship. They don't care about any other part of the body. This is described in the book of Daniel, that the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar, and I also believe that the name Nebuchadnezzar meant "in God we trust." When you look in Revelation, the 7 thunders that were sealed up, a seal has a front and a seal has a back. Now this dollar here shows you 2 seals. It shows you the front seal and the back seal of the United States of America, but this is also a front seal, and this is the back seal for this scroll. And there are, when it says in Revelation the 7 thunders, he says to John the divine, seal up what the 7 thunders have uttered. So he didn't get to say them, but what the 7 thunders uttered is sealed up right here on each one of the dollars. That in God we trust, and you agree to that trust whether you like it or not. When you use the money, you worship God, you worship the central bank, you will do whatever laws they tell you to do, or they will come after you as though you dashed your foot on a stone. They will send their angels concerning you. So that is what is meant by all those mysterious things that we have there in the Bible. That's so peace.